Hey everyone, I'm Dan Fredenberg, and I've got my friend Jeff Holst returning today. And I first want to thank you for joining me, Jeff, because this video is presented by 506 Beamy, and you're coming in cold with like little to no background at all. And I know that you intentionally haven't had a bad day in quite some time, including when you got diagnosed with leukemia and got to the point now where you're not undergoing any more treatments for it. But for the sake of tradition, how you doing today, Jeff?
No bad days. But actually, I am still under treatment for leukemia. It's
Okay.
just it's completely controlled, so could be a lot worse. But yeah, no, I'm doing pretty well. So thank you for having me. I'm always excited to talk to you, and I'm interested to hear what you have to present today because I haven't heard anything about it other than you wanted to talk to me about this. So
Sweet, perfect. And my first question for you is: you're basically retired. Do you want to lift up your camera again so we
yeah,
can see
yeah,
what's out your window there, what your office looks like? That's a lot nicer than out my
yeah.
window.
I
But
imagine. Yeah, I mean, so I'm yeah, I'm here in Puerto Rico. I've been here for well, off and on since the middle of last year. And I'm renting right now. I'm selling my house. I actually just made this long post on Facebook about how I think the housing market is very confusing. So I'm just getting out of personal primary residences. And but I still am a big fan of real estate. So I'm not selling all my real estate, just single family primary residence type real estate. So
awesome, awesome. And so you're basically retired though, right?
yeah, yeah, more or less. I mean, I do a little real estate stuff, but I don't have a regular job, and I just kind of hang out in Puerto Rico and bounce back and forth between stateside and here. So
Awesome. And you're a licensed attorney, but you only draw up your own documents, right?
yeah, I don't even do that anymore. I'm licensed in a couple of states. I mean, not in Puerto Rico, but in Tennessee and Michigan, and I might even give up my license soon. I haven't done any legal work at all for anybody other than myself in about 10 years, and I haven't really done much for myself in the last few years because I think um, only a fool represents themselves. You know, there's a saying about that. But basically, I feel like there's something insulating about having someone else look over the stuff that you're doing. So
Yeah, definitely getting a second opinion and whatnot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But you're not a securities attorney, but you've invested in a few syndications before, right?
I've done some syndicating myself, and I've invested in some syndications. And I have a general understanding of the law, but I mean, only enough to be dangerous. I'm definitely not a securities attorney.
Right, right, exactly. And before we really get going, we've done some of the disclaimer stuff, but I want to make clear to you in the audience that I'm not a lawyer. Jeff is not your lawyer. We're not going to be discussing legal advice, and you should always consult with a lawyer who practices in the region where you live or will do business. How did I do on that disclaimer there, Jeff?
It's good, and I would just say, yeah, you should have a lawyer. Period. End of statement. And that you should be really clear that that lawyer knows who you are and that they're representing you. Because if you just listen to what I say on here, I've never heard of you. I don't know your unique situation. So even if I knew the law in your jurisdiction really, really well, I can't advise you without knowing all of the details and being able to have a back and forth. So
Awesome. Yeah. And Warren Buffett, he said that you should never ask a barber if you need a haircut. And I think that's because of conflict of interest. And I wanted to get you to hop in because 506 Beamy, like, if I'm going to be really honest, I felt kind of like a mad scientist devising it and putting it together. And before we get into the conflicts of interest and areas of law that you didn't specialize in, let's get some more of that idea of deferring to another attorney first. I recall that you've hired attorneys in the past as well. And what I want to try to get to in general terms only is what another attorney would know that you wouldn't. You already mentioned that they'd know specifics about the person, like the actual client, which might not, come to somebody's mind, but are absolutely relevant. And obviously, there are different laws in different regions, and there are quirks that are unique to certain places. And I suspect the hole in one's knowledge would be like in a different area of law would be more about precedent from old cases that only come up in these other specialties. Am I missing much, or are there more
there's
caveats?
also an issue spotting thing. So I'll give you an example from my own personal life when it comes to securities law because it's really relevant. I'm an attorney. My partner, in not my current partner, but my partner in this particular deal was also an attorney. We went to law school together, and we raised some money to buy a deal. Um, we did not know we were selling securities.
Mhm.
We violated all sorts of rules. Now, fortunately, it's a long time ago. It's outside of the statute of limitations,
Hmm.
but it was a real problem,
Hmm.
right? Like it was a real risk point. If that deal had gone bad, we would have had a whole bunch of potential liability that we didn't even appreciate. And it comes down to a lack of knowledge about that specific field of law. I never heard of securities law. They don't teach securities law in law school. I mean, there's an optional course for it or whatever, but it wasn't like they were like, hey, if you start raising money, you probably ought to check and see if you're, if you're accidentally selling securities. It wasn't something they brought up in law school. It wasn't on the bar exam. And so I think there's a couple of things that happen. You need a competent attorney that knows your situation, but also knows the area of law in which you're trying to engage, right? So you don't want a bankruptcy attorney advising you on how to get a divorce. You don't want a divorce attorney advising you on how to do securities law. And I was a bankruptcy and divorce attorney, and I can tell you I would have been a terrible securities attorney because I knew nothing about it. I know a bit more now, but not enough to give legal advice on it.
Awesome, awesome. And I was mentioning before that one of the issues of why, like for example, with all the commercial investors I'm hanging out with all the time, I'll get somebody who's in one state and they're investing in another, and so you obviously have to get that local for those reasons of maybe they have some laws specific to that area that are kind of quirky. But the SEC is federal. And when my read of the Constitution was that it says anything that's not federal, it should be the power of the states and municipalities. So I guess that, and it's just my guess that counties and even states can't create additional restrictions on sales of securities unless it's a Reg A, which I heard is a state level registration as opposed to a 506 being a C.
So it's not quite that simple, but in general, the federal statute preempts the state statute. So while there are rules in different states, and they can create some regulations, they can't constrain your ability to operate under the securities law at the federal level. So you do some notice filings and things like that in different states. And, again, talk to an attorney that's knowledgeable in that jurisdiction about what you're required to do. But in general, like when we raise money from multiple states, we're looking at, what are the rules for each individual state, and like what do we have to do to make sure we're complying. But obviously operating under the federal exemption gives you sort of a broad, again, depending on what you do, but if you're under 506B, for example, which I assume you wanted to talk about to some degree, if you're under 506B, that does preempt most of the state rules, but you do still need to be aware of the local jurisdictional requirements.
All right, sweet. So let's get on to that one first. I always find that 506C raises are far simpler to explain to people. And the reason why I say that they're easier to explain is because they can be public. You can go ahead and advertise, say, invest with me, whereas with a 506B, you can't. And those are there's some extra restrictions. So I guess I'll go ahead and finish that off. The other restriction about a 506C is that you can only accept accredited investors. And the way that you become an accredited investor, you can do it through some exams in licensing and that sort of stuff. But in general, people get there by having a net worth of $1 million or more, excluding their primary residence. So it doesn't matter if you own a $3 million house. If you're living in it, it doesn't count towards that $1 million limit. And then the other thing is if you don't have that, you can get an income-based, what do you want to call it? You get a pass. You become an accredited investor if you're making more than 200 grand a year on your own, or 300 grand a year in combination with your spouse. So again, that's a pretty easy one. And I've heard maybe in your circles you hear about more of this. In 506C raises, I've heard some people running into issues where people run out of accredited investors in their network, and so they have to switch to a B just to include somebody to get them over the finish line. Is that something that sounds familiar, you heard of? Or
yeah, I've heard of people doing that. I mean, there are risk points to that too, right? Because you can't, once you start accepting money, you don't get to choose a different exemption. So you have to do like sort of a parallel raise and stuff. And I'm not an expert on that at all, but I would say, pick one and stick to it is probably the better strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The 506B has a lot of advantages. It has some disadvantages too, right? The big advantage, of course, is you have more flexibility in who you accept from an accredited investor standard. There actually are a couple of other ways to become an accredited investor, like holding certain financial licenses and things like that. But basically, it's just the Securities and Exchange Commission saying, hey, if you're only dealing with people that have a certain level of sophistication and they're using the net worth and the income as a proxy for like how sophisticated they are, there's less risk that you're taking advantage of them. So we're going to let you go ahead and advertise and reach out to people. There are other ways you can do this too. You can go through a Series A, or even like an IPO or something where you don't have to be accredited to invest in it. That's still a type of syndication, but what's happening there is the Securities and Exchange Commission is actually digging through those applications and determining in advance, sort of preemptively, this is acceptable. We're going to allow you to make this offering. Where with a 506B or a 506C, what you're really doing is filing for an exemption from the requirement that you have a license to sell securities, and the exemption saying, hey, if you're only selling to accredited investors, that's cool. We'll let you use this option. The other one is 506B, which I'm sure you're about to explain, but it's really just about having a substantial pre-existing relationship with that individual and understanding enough about their finances that and are making a judgment in your own behalf that this person has the ability to understand the risk they're undertaking. And then you're allowed to take some unaccredited investors in that circumstance. Still limited, I think 35 unaccredited investors, an unlimited of accredited investors, and you can raise an unlimited amount of money. Of course, from unaccredited investors and limited to 35, there's a practical upside limit to how much you can raise, because if they had an unlimited amount of money, they'd be accredited at that point. So.
Right. Yeah, that's really great. And as far as the 506B goes, I think one of the other things that has to be emphasized is it's supposed to be private. It's you're not supposed to be, telling everybody and their dog. But I want to go back. You're one of the few people who I can say this to. You mentioned the word substantial, and I've heard them use the word substantive. And I know that if laws are old enough, then people will use old words that have disappeared or something. Is there something in law that differentiates between substantive?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm aware of. And again, it's not my area of expertise. My understanding of the law has been, I better really know the person. Like, I know that's not like a specific standard, but if I've talked to you one time, that's probably not enough. If we've had several conversations over a period of time, we have a pre-existing relationship that on the surface appears to be unrelated to the offering I'm making. Like, what I can't do is I can't be like, hey, Dan, nice to meet you. And then come back 5 minutes later. Oh, it's good to see you again, Dan. Oh, by the way, I have this deal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I really have to know you before the deal exists. And I have to know enough about your circumstances where I can make an evaluation that this might be an appropriate deal for you. What I can't do is solicit, right? I can't go out and put an advertisement out. I can't go out and get a billboard that says invest in my deal. I really do have to have that relationship with you, and that's that is a constraint on your ability to raise money, obviously. But honestly, for most people, it's not that big of a constraint, because if you don't know someone, then they're probably not investing in your deal anyway, right? Like most of the people are like, our investors are almost all, even if we do a 506C, the vast majority of our investors are people that we personally know, that we've known for a long time, that have probably invested in other deals with us, that we can pick up the phone and call and have a conversation with them and tell them why we think this deal is appropriate for them. Because most people don't just go, oh, I heard that, I saw that guy on 506B, me, right? And Dan interviewed him, so I must invest with him now. I have to. I got to go out and do it right this second. Right. Even if I put out a Facebook ad or something, like, people are going to be like, I don't know who this guy is. Like, why should I invest with him? There are exceptions, of course. You've got your Grant Cardones of the world that spend a ton of money on marketing, and they have tons of investors that don't know them personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're really the gigantic exception that everyone sees.
Yeah.
They're not the rule. The vast majority of people, in fact, the vast majority of securities filings for exemptions are 506B for that reason.
Right. Exactly. So
and they're a lot simpler to do too, right? They require less disclosures and things like that. I mean, still there's a lot of disclosures, but it's not as complicated.
Right. And I know that 506C, it requires a third party verification that of your accredited status. I understand that some people don't want to do that, especially if one of their liabilities, is a little bit iffy. But
well, and that's the other thing too, right? Accreditation, like, it's actually kind of complicated for people like me. Like, if you own a bunch of real estate, like, how do I know what my net worth is, right? But the perfect example is the former president. He said he was worth 10 billion, and Forbes said he was worth 2 billion. It was probably somewhere in between. Who really knows? Unless you sell your stuff and go to cash, you don't know what it's worth. Like, we could talk about how silly this system is forever. You're talking about the primary residence exemption to the net worth. So I just told you I'm going to sell my house, right? So my house is worth $500,000. If I had a free and clear house worth $1 million, right? And I had $0 in the bank, I'm not accredited. If I sell my house and go rent from someone, I become accredited the next day. That makes no sense, right? That. How does that make me more sophisticated? I mean, it doesn't flow for me, but that's what the rules are, and I believe in following rules, so I do what I have to do to follow the rules. Although, I mean, obviously, I'm not selling my house so that I can sneak into the accredited world, because I have a bunch of real estate, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to sit on the beach and not work that hard. So
yeah, exactly. Who knows what inflation will end up doing. But the thing that came up to my mind, and like, this is one of the easiest ways to prove that this was my idea, if I ever have to prove it, which is that my background was in CRMs. Okay, so I'm aware of everything that people try to save in a CRM and the things that they end up failing at. And I'm also aware of plausible deniability as something that's out there. The other idea is, like, Apple, iTunes has taught everybody to scroll to the bottom, hit I accept without reading. So I really don't like web forms in general as a way to verify many things. Because, also, like school, we've all been through school, so we know to try and pick the right answer, even though it's not the true answer, which is a terrible idea to do on anything related to investment. Just for the record, okay, do not lie. Oh my goodness, you're just hurting yourself.
Well, and also read what you're signing. I mean, like, don't lie and say you're accredited if you're not. That's a terrible idea, obviously. But also, like, if you're investing in someone's deal, they're probably presenting you with a PPM that's 100 pages or so long. If they're not, then they're really not doing what they need to do, and you got to be skeptical of that too. But if they present you with a 100-page document, don't just flip to the last page and sign it. You better have a pretty good idea of what you're actually signing. And a lot of that stuff is standard form stuff, but you need to scan through it and make sure there's nothing crazy in there, right? Well, there's I think a debate about things like, scroll to the bottom and hit accept, those terms actually being enforceable. It's definitely not enforceable if you don't accept them, right? Like, so like, well, it might not be enforceable anyway. It's definitely not if you choose not to accept them. And so if there's something in there you don't like, and we've all sat there at a mortgage table and signed where the title company told us without reading all the docs. I mean, I've done it about 5 million times. I'm exaggerating a little, but not much. But you do need to be concerned about that. And I mean, it's actually why I think it's really smart to have other attorneys involved, because then you're paying someone else to read the docs and make sure they're right. And that's not an excuse to completely ignore it, because you can't trust anybody 100%, even your own attorney, unfortunately.
That's a beautiful thing. So the conundrum I ran into is, how do you prove? So like saying the substantive relationship, I've heard that described as nebulous, and that's a good way. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. It's nebulous. But I was trying to get, because, I'm the attention to detail guy. I got a book about it. And I was going like, so what specifics can we actually pick apart to say it's like the substantive relationship is there? And going back to what you were saying earlier about how just seeing somebody on a podcast is not enough to make somebody say, sure, I'll put 50K or 100K in that person's next deal because I like the cut of their jib. It's just not going to happen. You have to.
And it does happen occasionally, but it's pretty rare. Let's be honest.
Okay, right.
Like,
it doesn't happen.
And it's probably not the right way to be investing for those people that are doing that.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the specifics that I was going for, and I showed you that that document just before this we hit record. It varies from mine. Well, the specifics that I found would really show that this person is a good fit. They're not going to be the weakest link in the chain, if you will, in the investor pool. I think the level of sophistication of the investor has to be like top of the list to understand, and it doesn't matter if it's B or C as far as I'm concerned, because we're dealing with illiquid assets, right? So in general, getting your money back is a huge pain in the ass. Okay.
No, it may be impossible, right? Like until the investment's gone full cycle. And actually, you said something really important there. I think that it's super important that you only take investors that fit your deal, regardless of what type of investment it is, B or C. Because if you take someone in, like say Dan, like let's say you're trying to produce a lot of income right now, and that's why you're investing in my deal. You're like, I'm going to give you 100 grand. I want to get 10 grand a month in income. Well, that's a great deal if you can get it, but that's not what my deal is offering, right? Well, if that's what you're looking for, and you come into my deal and my deal makes 5 grand a month, you're pissed off. Where most people are super happy, right? But not only that, you might also be a guy who's looking for appreciation and long-term wealth versus I need cash flow right now. If you're a high W-2 earner, you might be like, I really don't care what money I make next year. I care about what it's going to be worth 10 years from now. Well, that's a completely different type of deal. And if I'm offering that deal and I'm bringing someone in who's looking for cash flow, they're going to be pissed all the time, even though it might be an amazing home run deal by other people's standards. So it's really important to understand what you're offering and understand if it fits the person that's looking to invest in it. Now, obviously, that goes both ways. The investor should be trying to understand the deal and see if it fits their parameters. But as an offerer of an investment opportunity, I want to make sure that I'm not taking someone in that it doesn't fit their parameters, because that person's going to be a pain in my butt for the next however long that deal goes. They're going to be complaining. They're going to be wanting to know why they're not getting what they thought they were going to get, when in reality, I'm offering exactly what I said I was going to offer. Right. And so it is really important. And the only way to do that is to understand about that person, what their goals are, and understand that they know what they're looking for. And that's where sophistication comes in.
Right. And then the next one, I think it's a really difficult one to get out of a person, just because if they lack the sophistication, like the signal to noise ratio, borrowing from electricity, is going to be way too high. You're not going to really know what their appetite for risk is unless you also know their level of sophistication. And the way that I do it in what I started to do, and you've been on the Chance Encounter series, the interview series. What I do to find out appetite for risk, it's a combination of a couple different things. But the biggest one is I just say, okay, so what's your ideal property? Because if they say it's in the 100 to 200 range, then it's like, okay, well, they probably have a big sponsor who's their coach, who's telling them they need to jump into that because they don't have the holdings to handle something like that. If they're talking about something smaller, then it's like, okay, well, they're still getting started on their wealth building capital side, stuff like that. So as far as appetite for risk, maybe that's something that you can say a few words on how you get that out of a person and figure out if they're a good fit, rather than talking about anything.
Yeah, of course, to a large degree, the size of the property doesn't matter as much if you're a passive investor. Like when I'm looking at a passive investment, I'm thinking more about the class of property. Like, is it a hotel? Is it a gas station? Is it an apartment complex? And I'm looking at also the geographic location of it, because for me, it's about diversifying my footprint. I have a lot of real estate in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm not going to invest in someone else's deal in Chattanooga, Tennessee, right? Like if I'm putting money in someone else's deal, it's going to be somewhere else. And it's going to be a different type of property than what I normally do because I'm trying to diversify. And so some people are looking for that. Other people are like you said, they're out there looking for, I want to buy a 100-unit deal because, you know, ABC mentor told me that only 100 units and up makes sense for syndication. I disagree with that. I've syndicated deals that are like 15 or 20 units a couple of different times, and they've worked out really, really well. Much smaller raise, but again, it depends on that person's goals, and the only way you're going to know what their goals are is if they know what they are first. So that's where that sophistication on the front side comes in, and then it's about digging down and understanding what they're looking for.
Awesome. So the way that I approach commercial real estate, making my big jump, is you have to meet a gazillion people. Me, I'm a family man, so you know, being away from my kids is just not really an option for me. You know, it's something that it's a rarity for me to not be around, and that's on purpose. But what hit me is I started introducing myself and making these intro calls with commercial investors by saying, hey, I do the intro call like everybody else, but I do it in podcast format and I record it and I put it out there. And the big point is I want to document our relationship for 506B compliance. So basically what I've done is I've got something where I'm not pitching the person. I am doing something specific for a specific purpose, you know, where it's like, okay, well, if the person ends up, you know, partnering with me in some capacity, that's great, but it's not the overt goal up front. So sure. I had these 15-minute interviews. And then after that, are you familiar with some securities attorneys use the 3-touch principle?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the rule. Yeah.
Right. So the idea, just so you know, it's like, you know, you should have 3 separate interactions with somebody before you actually pitch them on your offer or your deal. And of course, like that rule on its own, that sounds like a recipe for disaster to me, because it's like, okay, so first time you're talking about a flower bed, second time you're talking about,
it's a rule of thumb. It's not 100% effective, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like the thing is nebulous, like you said at the beginning. It's just it's about really understanding and feeling comfortable with you have a real relationship with the person to the extent that you know enough about their finances to see if this is an appropriate offering for them. And there's no way that the SEC is going to know if you've talked to someone 6 times, whether all 6 of those times were about flower beds or if they're about, real estate or investing or, their personal goals or whatever. But at the same time, like the purpose of the 3-touch rule, I think, is to say, if you've talked to them a few times, there's a pretty good chance that you're learning about their situation. If you're doing your work properly and you're talking to someone 3 times, you probably learned a little bit about their finances. I mean, like I've talked to you more than 3 times. I feel comfortable in the conversations we've had that if I wanted to pitch you on one of my deals, it would probably be fine. But even still, I don't feel like I know enough about your investing goals to where I would actually do that, right? So I take this role as an offerer very seriously, and I think that's what people need to do. They need to really, like, if I were going to talk to you again and I was like, oh, I want to see if Dan wants to invest in this deal, the next conversation would be like, so tell me about your investments. What are you doing now? What are you interested in? I mean, I know you're a family guy. I know what kind of business you're in, but I don't know what you invest in. I don't know, what your goals are. Because we've never had that conversation, I wouldn't even think to ask you about a deal.
Yep, that's perfect. And so the content of those 15-minute interviews is, first I go through the 5 different motivations. If I'm going to be terse, it's going to be the first one is to preserve purchasing power. In other words, you've already got the assets where, like more idealist motivations, they're probably not going to be yours anymore. Okay, so in other words, you're more or less wealthy or set. Second one was trading time directly for wealth, and the idea is that's like getting out of the rat race or just accumulating that way. The third one is fast tracking retirement, aka taking control of your time. The fourth one is because you're just plain ambitious, and then the fifth one is because you're trying to save the world, or animals or something like that. So as you can see from that, like if they choose the first one, then I know it's like, okay, so this person's pretty well established. And if they choose the other ones, then it's like, okay, it's somewhere in between, like everyday Joe and something substantial, and come up from that. So that's where I get a little bit of the appetite for risk. I mentioned the other part about the ideal property for level of sophistication, but the other one I do is I go through the 6 different roles in a commercial deal.
Yeah, and I remember doing this with you, actually.
Right. So the idea then is that way I get their core competency as well. It's like, what exactly are you planning to contribute to this deal? Like your next deal, what is it? And then that way I think I know like what they're looking for, because part of my whole strategy is I realize as the internet guy, I have to talk to way more people than normal investors, because they're going to be doing something a little bit more regional with the people who are and properties who are around them. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a path of least resistance, talk to a gazillion people, and then if something falls in my lap, I talk to only the people who've already said, yeah, this is exactly what I want. So there's
it's a great way to build the team, for sure.
Awesome. And so then what I did is I always emphasize after I finish the interviews that, hey, so, that was our thing to show like a second touch as far as I'm concerned, right? The first one was like, hey, come on my show. Second one was, hey, let's get right down talking turkey as far as, what are your core competencies, motivations, all that sort of stuff. And what I emphasize though is that's well and good for you and me. Most people don't have their own podcast, so it's an expensive habit for a lot of people.
It is for me.
Right. So as a result, that's not really a practical solution. So what I did is I made a digital platform where I track members accessing each other's profile pages that include that video that has your level of sophistication, appetite for risk, core competency, that sort of thing. And so that way, here's the play. As a guy who, like, coming from digital security, recognizing the nature of vulnerabilities and how people can get really, really, really hosed, I was thinking that if somebody just denies, and they are a bad actor and they're doing it on purpose, I think the lack of documentation specific to level of sophistication, appetite for risk, core competency, something like that. I think that's a real uphill battle to keep out of court. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I have zero experience with any of this stuff. And I also understand that you're a securities person, but I'm just concerned about somebody saying, no. He just created all those documents himself after the fact to cover his butt for 506B. I never did any of those things. That's not me. I didn't submit that. That's kind of the play that I'm doing with 506B me. And now we're like really theoretical here. So what are some thoughts as far as
so I don't think there are very many people just completely fabricating stuff, to be honest. It's probably easier just to actually go meet people than it is to make stuff up and then convince them to invest in your deal. Because, if you like, say I'm like, hypothetically, I meet Jim Smith and I say, hey, Jim, let's talk about flower beds, like you said. And then the next time I see him, I introduce him to my dog. And the next time I see him, he introduces me to his cat. Then I go, hey, give me 50 grand. And he gives it to me, right? And then I'm afraid that I haven't like fully complied with the rules. So I make up a bunch of stuff, right? Like that's what you're saying, right? Now, but the problem with that is, like, Jim's never given me 50 grand if all we talked about was my dog, his cat, and the flower bed, right? Like we probably had to have a conversation about real estate along the line somewhere, right? Like there had to be some back and forth about investing. So it would almost be easier just to document the actual conversation than to like create something to sort of make it up. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't times where people are like, oh, hey, I have this great deal. You should invest in it. Here's the deal. The person gives them the money. And then after the fact, they go, oh, okay, well, shoot, I didn't actually know them. So I better like make this stuff up, right? I mean, that probably does happen. Well, I think it's like less frequent than what you think.
Yeah.
Although I will say, from a pure compliance perspective, tracking is the real issue, right?
Right.
And what you're talking about is tracking. So like,
And
there are lots of people
documentation.
I know, yeah, and documentation, right? Like that kind of stuff. Like there are lots of people I know that I've talked to multiple times, you for example, but I have zero record personally of talking to you, right?
Hmm.
I could go find it, right? I can go look on my LinkedIn and say, oh, look, here's a conversation we had on LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
oh, here's a video we did together, right? Like
Yeah.
I could track it down, but it would be a pain in my rear end to track that down because
Right.
I never intended to solicit you, and I didn't build out a system. And frankly, I'm really bad at this as a result of it because we don't have a shit ton of investors, for lack of a better word. We
Hmm.
have like, a half dozen people that invest in most of our deals. And so I don't really personally have that great of a system for tracking it. But as I've expanded my network, I've tried to take notes,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
tried to like, create a system, but I'm not great with CRMs. Maybe you could help me with that. Maybe you can't. I don't know.
Maybe this is
Right.
the solution
But
right
but
here.
maybe what you're talking about is actually what I need for this sort of thing, right?
Right, right. So the backbone of it, I want to try and keep it as simple as possible. Is everybody on 506 BME gets their own unique QR code. It's just yours, and you can print it out and put it on your lanyards or whatever. And so all it takes is if somebody has, like my phone has a QR code in it already, a
Yeah,
QR
yeah.
code scanner, and so if I scan that, it'll open it in a browser, and if I'm a 506 BME member, I just log in and it adds you, well in this case it's me, it adds you, exactly, yeah, it adds you to my watch list after I
Got it.
scan it.
So I need to create an account, and then after I did that, I would have an account.
Yes, exactly. You'd have an account, and then that's the free level. And then when I upgrade you, you'd have your own chance encounter interview there embedded in the site. I've also got it so that it can reveal the
So is this
calendar link.
just to be clear? Is this only for? I'm looking at the options. I just went to like look at your like if I'm setting up a site,
Hmm.
financier, sponsor, whatever, right? Like operations, all this stuff. But is there like a I just want to invest option?
And I just want to invest.
Yeah, like
It's a
I
neat
do none
idea.
of this stuff. I'm completely outside of real estate. I'm a doctor, and I'm interested in investing.
Yeah, yeah. I'd consider you a financier in that case.
Oh, that's a financier. Got it. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. That's what I'd be thinking. But yeah, so that's the
So
options
I
this
might
person.
slash that financier slash investor then, just to make it clear,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or
Okay.
whatever, just so people know. And like, I wouldn't know what to pick. Like, so my initial reaction is like, well, do I pick attorney? Do I pick operations? Do I pick, because I do a lot of stuff, right?
Right.
But like, I get what you're saying. All right, so I'm gonna sign up for an account later, and then we'll look at it more. But okay, go ahead. So then what's next?
Right, sweet. So the main purpose is I want a really efficient way when you're on a Zoom meeting or in a live event where you can just have that code, people can scan it, and then you are added to their watch list so they can watch it when it's convenient. That's the main thing. So in my own 506 BME profile, when I log in, if I move this over here, yeah, I guess I can do that without too much trouble. If I go to 506 BME, there it is here, and I log in like this, boom. It has my watch list up at the top. It has the profile right here that I can check out, and it's got my list of connections with all the tallies. And if I go to somebody's profile like Santa Claus, it shows the number of times that I've seen his profile. It has the number of times that he's seen mine when we connected, the actual content of his bio and the video itself. So I think it's a pretty tight way to make that second touch.
Yeah,
So,
so I mean, I think it does. I mean, obviously, I think what it does is it does clarify at least like, hey, we know we connected at this time. We know that I looked at, so I learned a little bit about you because I spent some time watching your video, whatever it is. So
mhm.
that makes sense to me. I mean, it's definitely a starting point. It still doesn't get you to your third touch, right? I mean, so
Right.
what's the solution to that?
Well, it includes your contact information, and I also.
So you can then go out and reach out to the person offline or whatever and have a conversation with them.
Right.
Is there a place for notes on there? Like,
That's
Like
what
if I
I'm.
talk to Santa Claus.
Yeah, that's what I'm adding. I'm going to add a DocuSign similar sort of thing of where you can have contracts or notes and have them verified by both people. So yeah, that's definitely where I'm going with all of this.
So it strikes me that the trick with anything like this, and I've seen other like not related to 506B, but I've seen other like contact exchange things where you like use a QR code and stuff, is that it requires enough adoption
Mhm.
to make it work, right?
Right.
Like, because if I show you my 506B me code and you're like, I don't know what that is, and you don't, and then you just like go, okay, whatever, what a weirdo showing me a QR code,
Yeah.
like I've got to have a conversation and explain it. Like,
Exactly.
it becomes less useful to me, right? The more
Hmm.
times I have to explain why I'm doing it, I'm better off just to be like, here, just text me. Because like what I do now when I meet someone, right, is I say, let me text you this video about my life, right? I have a video about my life and I text it to people. It's not all that different than what you're suggesting, right? Here's a
Right.
video about, here's my investing life.
Right.
I have a more broad video that's like 12 minutes long. That's like, here's where I was, here's what I did, here's what happened, and now here's where I am, kind of thing, which actually would be really useful for someone who wanted to know if I was a good investor for them or not, right?
Hmm. 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 Yeah, that's
So I
beautiful.
like the concept in general because you're creating this content for people. I had to go, hire people and edit a video and all this stuff, and you're like, I'm going to interview them and just stick it up there. It's
Yeah.
pretty awesome, actually.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
I like some of it a lot. I don't know. I mean, I think your hurdle is going to be in getting adoption. Like you got to get
Right.
enough people on there to make it worthwhile. Because if the
Definitely.
only people on there are Jeff Holst, Dan Fredenberg, and Santa Claus, it's not going to work very well.
Exactly, exactly. And on that note, if you want a 506B me after this, you can just hit that code. I'll also have some links in the chat. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me today. This has been absolutely fantastic.
You're welcome.
Awesome.